It's Ash from Super Videos, back for another video for Season 6 of Fear the Walking Dead. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at a huge moment from the upcoming episode, Season 6, Episode 8, the mid-season premiere, which was called The Door. Now, obviously, because this episode was released a week early, most fans have not yet watched the episode. So because of that, I tried to make this thumbnail as spoiler-free as possible and tried my best to make the title not reveal too much information and be as generic as possible so that people who have not watched the episode will not be spoiled. But I did have a much more spoilery thumbnail that I wanted to use, which I'm probably still going to use and upload after the episode airs. But for the time being, I will be using this thumbnail, which is a lot less spoilery. So in this video, we're gonna take a look at, I would say, the biggest moment from this episode and maybe the most shocking and critical moment of Season 6 in general. For fans who have watched this episode, they know exactly what I'm talking about. We're gonna take a look at whether this was another mistake made by Fear writers or whether there's anything positive that can come from this decision to do what they did in this episode. And yes, I have another mistake on purpose because they have done something very similar to this before as well. So with that said, stay tuned. We'll be right back to talk more about this. Alright, before we get into this, if you're not a subscriber and enjoy the content, consider subscribing to join our community, share and smash the like button, and press the bell to be notified when we upload. Now, before we actually get into this video, a massive spoiler warning from Season 6, Episode 8 of Fear the Walking Dead. If you have not watched the episode, you probably don't want to watch this video right now because I will be talking about the most talked about scene from that episode, and like I said, arguably the biggest moment of Season 6 of Fear in general, and maybe even Season 5. So consider this your final spoiler warning. Alright, so with that said, let's dive right into it. So obviously, at this point, you probably know the moment that I'm talking about, but for those of you that don't, obviously in this episode we had none other than John Dory being shot to death by Dakota, and of course, after he was shot, he fell into the water and washed up to shore, where he was found by June as a walker. Now, before I actually talk more about this is actually the thumbnail that I was gonna use, but obviously this is very spoilery, so if I put this and uploaded that ahead of the episode's air date, it would spoil it for a lot of people. So that's why I decided not to have this as the thumbnail, but I'm probably gonna use this as the thumbnail after the episode airs. Now, in terms of John Dory's death, there's a few things to kind of talk about. The first and foremost is the fact that John Dory, who I find to be one of the biggest characters or one of the major characters at this point, deserved, in my opinion, a much more fitting death. A death that actually makes sense. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say that not all major characters need to get a heroic death, and you're absolutely right, but the way I look at it is every death needs to have a purpose. It needs to push the story towards a bigger and better direction. And in this case, I definitely don't see how this death can push the story towards a bigger and better direction. Let's backtrack though. Let's just talk briefly about what actually happened. So of course, in this episode, we got the big reveal that it was none other than Dakota that actually killed the ranger that Janice was with, and that truth obviously didn't come out. Ginny was actually hiding that truth so that they don't throw Dakota in jail or worse, kill her. And then obviously at that point, John was brought on to investigate and everything like that. He did his best to save Janice, who was framed. And obviously that didn't go well, and Janice ended up getting killed at the end of the day. So in this episode, John actually finds this out. He finds out that it was Dakota who did this and triggers Dakota to go into her defensive mode and point a gun at John Dory. And then as they're talking, as John Dory is trying to calm her down and get her to a point where they can actually talk about what happened, she just pulls the trigger and shoots John Dory in the chest. Now, of course, they're on the bridge, so John Dory falls into the water and washes away. And of course, later on, we see that she washes up to shore, where June finds her as a walker. Now, in terms of where the story can go from here, I mean, there's really two things that they can do. But before we even get into what they can do now that this happened, let's talk a little bit about how familiar this situation is. We actually need to go back to season 4 of Fear the Walking Dead, specifically season 4 episode 10, where we actually had none other than Charlie shooting Nick in the chest and killing him. So now just replace the name Charlie with Dakota and replace the name Nick with John. It's the same exact situation. Obviously, the way it happened was a little different because Dakota killed John because she didn't want her secret to get out, but Charlie killed Nick because she wanted vengeance for what happened to her brother, I believe. So obviously the situation is a little different, but at the end of the day, it's still a pretty young female character shooting a beloved, and I would say one of the most popular male characters that's on the show. So John and Nick. So it's very, very similar. And the reason why I say, are they making another mistake, is because obviously most fans were not happy when Charlie killed Nick. And aside from fans not liking that Charlie killed Nick and that everyone loved Nick, people didn't like the fact that Charlie made buddies with Alicia and they moved on like nothing happened in a short amount of time. And how at this point Charlie is one of the gang. So that obviously is the thing that set off many fans. Now in this case with Dakota and John, it's very similar because obviously many fans at this point feel that John deserved a better death just like Nick deserved a better death, and that it's like they're doing the same thing all over again and making the same mistake all over again. And that gets me to my next point. Where can they go from here? Now that Dakota has done this, where does the story go? There's really two ways the story could go. They could either go the redemption arc, which is like identical to what they did with Charlie. Now, that's not completely true because they didn't really redeem Charlie. They just pretended like they did and assumed or hoped that fans would ignore it or completely forget about it. But you get my point. They still went a sort of redemption arc with Charlie. So one way they could do it is have Dakota go through a similar phase, which would be, like I said, underwhelming because we've seen it before. So in a way, it's like a really cheap way to recycle an old storyline that, to be completely honest, didn't even work in the first place. So that's one way they could go with it. Another way they could go with it is a direction where Dakota actually gets killed at some point in the future, either by one of the survivors or possibly by her own sister. Now, if they go this direction, then it does, to a point, make the story a little different than what happened with Nick and Charlie. And in a way, I would say it's enough for me to not give them a pass on it, but to see the point of it, because it pushed the story towards a very different direction and a direction that most fans probably don't see coming. Now, obviously, if a survivor kills Dakota, it wouldn't have the same impact because it would still feel like it wasn't worth it and that John deserved a much better death. But if they do go the direction where it's Ginny who kills Dakota, then I could kind of understand where they were going with the story. So it wouldn't feel as repetitive, obviously, and it would definitely feel like John's death pushed the story towards a very interesting direction. However, with that said, we know that Dakota is gonna be with the survivors after this moment because we've seen her with them in teasers and trailers. So more likely that they're going the redemption arc. You know what I mean? And what makes it even worse is what happened immediately after. So Morgan came in, he found out what Dakota did, and instead of confronting her and, I would say, doing what anyone should have done at that point, which is either leave Dakota behind or just kill her, what Morgan did is basically try to hear her out. You know what I mean? Now, before I move forward, I call BS on what they did, where they revealed it was Dakota that saved Morgan, because if you really think about it, it doesn't line up. It's like so out of the blue, and there was like no hints about it or no build up, where it feels like they just threw this in there last minute and that they didn't plan it originally. But that obviously put Morgan in a pretty weird spot, because he was looking at the person who saved him, but at the end of the day, it was the person that killed his best friend John. So they tried their best to make that scene work, but I still feel like it was forced. That is more proof that they're going the direction where Dakota killing John is not gonna cause any sort of real conflict or tension within the survivors. And I think that's a terrible direction for the story to go. But then again, if they go the direction where Ginny ends up killing Dakota, I think it might satisfy some fans, and I think it might be enough to reduce the backlash that the writers would receive. If they end up doing this story where Ginny kills Dakota in the future, I think people at that point will come to terms with what they did. But with all of that said, I am interested to know everyone's thoughts and opinions. What do you think about this moment? Do you think it was forced? Do you think it made sense? And where do you think that leads the story towards? Do you think they're gonna go the direction of redeeming Dakota like they redeemed Charlie? Or do you think they're gonna go a direction where someone's gonna kill Dakota at the end of the day? Share your thoughts and opinions in the comment section below. If you're not a subscriber and enjoy the content, subscribe to join our community and press the bell to be notified when we upload. That's it for this video. See you next time for another super video.